Welcome to Circular Firing Squad. I'm Marty Gensius, a counseling faculty at Kent State University and host for Circular Firing Squad. We've got 5 members, 5 questions, and 5 answers to each question. Questions are generated by each squad member and run from the serious to the silly. Let's go ahead and do a roll call. We'll start with Jen.
Hey everyone, Jen Cook, Assistant Professor of Counselor Education and Counseling Psychology at Marquette University.
Hi, everybody. Elliot Ingersoll, Professor of Counseling at Cleveland State and co-host of Apply Topically.
Eric Perry. I am a clinical faculty member at Southern New Hampshire University and co-host of the Tech Savvy Professor podcast, soon to be revived on the Pod Talk Network.
Hi, I'm Gina Martin, and I'm a counselor education and supervision doctoral candidate, and I also adjunct at Northwestern University.
We're missing one of our regulars. Stephanie couldn't be here tonight, and we look forward to having her come back next show. So we have a little bit shorter of a show. Actually, Stephanie had a really tough question, so we're all kind of glad we don't have to answer that question this week. But Jen, you start up with your first question.
Yes, kicking us off tonight. What is one work-related stress you want to eliminate? And as a little bit of background, this could be a legit thing that you could eliminate, or this could be fantasy, something that if you had everything that you ever wanted, you could eliminate it. And we are going to start answers tonight with Elliot.
Okay, well, this is a tough one, and I'm glad you gave that caveat because, I thought a lot about this. And I mean, for me, going into academia, working at university, there was really this part of me that still believes we're looking for the truth to the extent we can discern it, communicate it, explore it, research it. And other people don't seem to share that aspiration. And I would love it if they could kind of come on board with that. But, so often politics, interpersonal things that, they're small, but they kind of get in the way. I just wish we could set aside the political, interpersonal differences. And we have the best jobs in the world. And I just wish we could pursue as much as we can know of the truth and revel in that. How about you, Eric?
And I appreciate that, Elliot. I mean, I think sometimes we get bogged down in the day-to-day and we don't do enough of what I think drew me into academia to begin with. And part of that is this kind of search for truth, this research, this, even just broadening the scope of the profession. I think sometimes we get bogged down in just getting through the semester, the term, or whatever you might say. My answer is a little bit more pragmatic. And I know Marty shared some of this in previous shows, but if we could eliminate meetings, that would be wonderful. And I say that because I had a meeting the other day about a meeting. It was a pre-planning meeting to plan said meeting that was to happen a week from now. These meetings that could have been emails, that could have been 10-minute conversations at the end of a meeting. I feel like we wrap so much of our time into talking about what we're doing that we don't do enough doing, if that makes any sense. That was the first thing that came to mind for me. What about you, Gina?
I'm loving all the head nods as we talk about eliminating meetings entirely. Mine is a little bit pragmatic too, kind of similar to Eric's. And I think it has a lot to do with the stage of where I'm at in my dissertation. So we've officially entered into the recruitment phase. And one stress that I think would be awesome if we could totally eliminate would be trying to get participants. So just always have a participant pool that's ready to go at the drop of a hat. As soon as that IRB is approved, they're in. That would be great. How about you, Marty?
Well, I'm going to go for the big kahuna. And it's promotion and tenure review. Now, it's an antiquated system. It's oppressive and has its own racist origins. And it focuses on what one definition of scholarship is and should look like. So everybody's being judged against this moving target, but it's a target that's only one way in which we do scholarship. I don't know how we would do it. I just kind of imagine this world. I'm not involved in promotion. I've been promoted and tenured, and I don't have to worry about it. But I see the stress that it does with colleagues, that apparently it did with me too. And it's a system that we just keep chasing. And so every year we're doing file reviews of faculty. And I just had this fantasy that if we could remove promotion and tenure and just let people do good work, what would our system look like? Would we have more time to do good work? And how would we, we keep at universities keep propping ourselves up in terms of these kinds of levels of research and grant and things like that. So we can get competitive with other institutions. But what kind of world would it be if we just eliminated all of that? And for me, it would be starting with a promotion and tenure. Jen?
Well, thank you for that, Marty. As somebody who's ensconced in that process right now, who is up, I appreciate that immensely, because I think to myself, wow, that it is a lot of stress, and it's been a lot of stress for 6 years. I think when I was listening to both Eric, Elliot, and Marty, which isn't a both, that's a 3-person group, I think that my answer sort of encompasses all of them, which is getting rid of the drama. And there just seems to be so much drama associated with our jobs, whether it's promotion and tenure, or not allowing voices to be heard, or silencing truth, silencing people who want justice and are working toward justice. Meetings about meetings about meetings that are really about getting back at somebody. I mean, the list is very long, I think, that could encompass the drama that takes us away from our true work, which are serving our students who serve our communities, and by extension, continue to promote wellness, prevention, all of the things that we stand for as a profession. So my dream world is to end the drama that prevents us and takes the emotional energy away from the things that matter most. Next question coming from Elliot.
I just wanted to say I love that. Yeah, the drama. And we had a committee at university about committees. And I was like, wow, I'm in a surrealist novel. Anyway, all great answers. My question, and I know for a group of readers like this is going to be a tough one too. Who is an author who you admire and why? Eric.
So this one for me took a little bit of time. And I'll be honest, I don't read much of his stuff anymore. But Stephen King really brought me into reading. I read It and The Stand when I should have been reading books that were much more appropriate and much more my age level. But I feel like it brought me to a place where I really could appreciate reading. I really appreciated what it meant to, and anybody who knows Stephen King's style knows that there's a picture painted there. He painstakingly just paints the scene for you. And I think that helped me in dealing with authors that don't necessarily do that leave you a little bit more room to kind of imagine that scenery for yourself. So I don't know, it just brought me into it. And I think of different times in my life and experiencing those different novels, with Dean Koontz somewhere in between. And I know he gets a hard time as being the Stephen King lackey. But, I remember particular times in my life going back to those books, so the series that came out from those books, and they signify certain points in my life. And I don't know if I could identify an author that has had that much of an influence or is connected to memory for me in that way other than Stephen King. So, I have to admire the talent. I have to admire the just innate ability. And he continues to just fascinate me as a human, as an individual. So yeah, that's has to be Stephen King for me. What about you, Gina?
I love that. So I picked an author for the same reason that Eric picked Stephen King. I love Ken Follett. So different genre, but same idea, painting the picture and really getting into that character development was something that I found so inspiring. I am a huge reader. I like to read every genre. I like to read all sorts of things. But the Ken Follett books really, I love how he intertwines all of the different characters into the same storyline, and somehow they're all intermingled together. And I just think it's beautiful writing. So that question, it took me a long time to come to that answer, because I was first going through counseling authors and then going through all of these different things, all the different authors I've read. But I think overall that Ken Follett is my number one. How about you, Marty?
My favorite is Harlan Ellison. Now, most folks have probably heard about Isaac Asimov, Ray Bradbury, even Rod Serling, but few have heard about Harlan Ellison. It's described as sort of new wave speculative science fiction, if you want to add science into it, but it's really speculative fiction. And he won too many awards to really mention here. I think he was one of the most awarded authors. Most Trekkies know him for The City on the Edge of Forever. And there was a novella turned into a really bad movie called A Boy and His Dog. But he's published over 1,700 short stories and was incredibly prolific. And he was an artist as an author. I mean, very skilled. Eric, if you like Stephen King, I think you will really like Harlan Ellison. Short stories, many of them coming from first person. So you become the character as you're reading it. And he writes about alienated kinds of situations or people. The first story I read by him was I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. And it's a great science fiction piece, a short story. And I read it in high school. And at the same time, they were making us read some Elizabethan novel in advanced English, AP English. So we're reading this. And I said to the teacher, why don't you read some Harlan Ellison? Why don't you let us read some Harlan Ellison? So I made her read. Well, I didn't make her. She said, let me see it. And she read I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. And we continue to read Elizabethan English. Other books, titles that he has, Gentleman Junkie, Deathbird Stories, The Beast That Shouted Love at the Heart of the World, Pain God and Other Delusions, Love Ain't Nothing But Sex Misspelled, Spider Kiss, and Approaching Oblivion. He did some consultation with Twilight Zone and Babylon 5, but he had this love-hate relationship with television. He was also probably one of the more litigious types of people. When upset with a publisher, he sent a publisher a dead gopher in a box. And he liked to provoke. And that was the thing that I loved about him. He was a social activist. He participated in the Selma to Montgomery March, and he was a staunch defender of writers' rights. I got to meet him at his last public appearance at the Cleveland Public Library in 2007. Aileen and I went up to see him. I had admired him, of course, all my life since high school. And it was just great to meet him. And he was exactly the way you would imagine him to be. He lived a real, authentic siren against hypocrisy life. And there's an interesting documentary that you can get called Dreams with Sharp Teeth. And it's Harlan Ellison, and it's the story of his life, lots of interviews with him, lots of interesting guests talking about him, Dreams with Sharp Teeth, and the author is Harlan Ellison. Jen?
So I struggled with this question, I think because I am such an avid reader and I read across lots of different genres. Probably the only exception to that is I'm not a big fan of fantasy and science fiction, which I know puts me as an outlier in all of this. I just thought Eric go to the keyboard. I'm about to get slammed in the chat most likely for this one. However, I respect those genres just as much as anything else that I read voraciously, because I feel like anybody who sits down to paint a story that can captivate folks, I have so much respect for that, I think, as a reader and as somebody who writes as part of her job, no matter what kind of writing that is. I appreciate the process and the creativity that goes into it. And so I love one-hit wonders in terms of books and authors just as much as I love series. And, I could tell you what I'm reading right now that I'm loving. And I'm not sure that would really paint any picture for you, but I think what's important to know about what I respect the most and what I admire the most is the tenacity that people have to sit down and to be an author and to publish their thoughts and their work of story. And I think at the end of the day, I can't narrow down, because I really appreciate and love that commitment to story and to writing. Elliot?
Yeah, these are great answers. And I struggled with this too. And I took a utilitarian approach, and I was like, whose books am I reading for the third time? And it's Neil Peart and his travel books, Traveling Music, Far and Away, Far and Near, Far and Wide, The Masked Rider. I mean, people know him as the drummer for Rush, but the guy could write, and he seemed to me like a polymath. He knew the flora and fauna of all the deserts he rode through. He bicycled across Africa, and he would write about the plants. He would write about the birds. He was an avid bird watcher. And I had a motorcycle for about 10 years, and then I lost the use of my right hand for about 3 years, and that was not a good combination. So I sold the bike. And now that I got my hand back, I'm like hoping in the next 5 to 7 years to get another motorcycle and do what he called shun piking, which is back roads tours. He said the best roads are the roads that are only traveled by people who live on them. And they're just 2-lane, 1-lane roads. And he put photos in his book about Europe and Canada and the United States and South America. And he would ride tens of thousands of miles between Rush concerts. And I mean, long distance motorcycling is very physically demanding. So his work inspired me, and he knew about so much. I learn something every time I read his books. So that's who I chose. The next question is from Eric.
So changing the tone just a little bit. So my question is, did your relationships change when you earned your doctorate? And if you haven't earned it yet, how might you expect they would change? And the first response goes to Gina.
So as I thought about this today, I thought maybe it's me being naive, or maybe there's something that I don't know, but I don't think many of my relationships will change that much once I have earned the PhD, since I'm almost there, but not quite. I feel like a lot of my personal relationships, most people that I interact with on a normal daily basis don't even know what a PhD is or what I'm getting a PhD in, and it really means nothing to them. So I don't think that in that regard, it's going to change too much. With students, I feel like they don't really know the difference either, since half the emails I get are Dr. Martin as it is, even though I tell them at the beginning of class, my name's Gina Martin and you can call me Gina, and I don't have my PhD yet. It's just something that continually comes up. So yeah, and maybe you all can enlighten me. Maybe there's something that I'm missing, but I don't think that my relationships are going to change all that much in a few months from now. Marty?
I have a real short answer, I think, to this question. Didn't have social relationships before my PhD, don't have them now. Any relationships outside of work that I have, PhD doesn't come into it, although sometimes I wish it would. Jen?
I'm first generation college, so I think that any relationship shifts that I had probably happened when I earned my bachelor's degree. The joke in my family for years was, you still in school? I mean, it was just over and over and over again. And nobody ever asked like what I went to school for. I think maybe an aunt or something asked one time and then completely regretted it the minute it came out of her mouth, because, of course I was excited to talk about it and that somebody actually asked. And so I started to describe it, and I saw the glaze like come over her face, but I think that it was already kind of done earlier. Most people, as Gina was saying, like, they don't know you have a PhD. They don't care you have a PhD. I'm not real vocal about it. And I think this is also the first gen from low social class kind of thing. Like, when people ask me what I do and I don't really know their situation, I typically say that I teach. And I leave it at that until I'm asked more follow-up questions, because I think I'm always trying to read, like, are people going to think I'm a regular person? And that has been a value to me, that I don't want people to think that I'm not regular because I have a higher degree and a white collar job, because I come from a working class background. So I think that's something that I pay attention to, at least in myself. So I don't know if they're having a different reaction, but that's the reaction that I tend to take with people in terms of how I present myself. Now, if I'm, with a bunch of charity folk who I think might give money to my program, then of course I'm an assistant professor at Marquette University. But outside of those environments, I teach. What do you do? Over to you, Elliot.
Yeah, this is interesting because I'm the first generation to go to graduate school. My father went to university on the GI Bill, but my life in Youngstown was pretty meh. I have a very core group of friends from secondary school, and those relationships didn't change at all. But I got very close to people in my doctoral cohort, and I noticed a lot of, I call it friend drift after graduating, because I'm the kind of person, when I feel close to people, I'm all in. I throw myself in. And that has not served me well. Well, especially in bands, because bands break up for stupid reasons. But, I noticed people I thought I had a lot in common with in grad school. Once I got partnered and we started having kids, and it radically changed, much to my disappointment. But there was a natural kind of flow to it, which I kind of had to go with. But I was kind of sad about it. And I think, though, raising children probably had more to do with the drift than graduating from the doctoral program. That's just my thoughts now. How about you, Eric?
So this question kind of comes out of a story. I went golfing, and something I've recently taken up, and it's quite a shit show. Just me personally, I'm just not. Sports and I aren't a thing. So, and I know golf is kind of a leisure sport or whatever you want to call it, but I still manage to not have the physicality to be able to do that either. In any case, I'm riding with 8 different people, 4 different carts, and we're stopped and letting people play through because we're a big group and having a conversation. And it's somebody I've known for a while, probably about 15 years, calls me Doc, right? He's called me that since I went into the Doc program. He just thinks it's funny. It's kind of his thing, whatever. And so people are asking questions, and some of them are acquaintances, some of them are people I know a little bit better. And they're like, well, he's a psychologist, right? And then, I cringe and my whole body kind of tenses up when I hear that. And then out comes the involuntary explanation. No. That's, and I go into the whole spiel. But before I start, a friend of mine that's with me, my close friend, takes over and takes the entire conversation on himself and starts to let the troops know where things stand. And I think what's interesting is there's these different levels of friends that I've had over the years that have handled this in different ways. And I found myself being drawn to people for different reasons. And I think why I've always been drawn to spending time with him is the same reason that this particular occasion happened. He pays attention. He's the person that will remember minute details and call me and ask, did you finish pulling your weeds the other day? How's the flower bed look? Just stuff like that, and I think about other friends who I just can't connect with in the same way because I've shifted so much. I've changed so much in terms of what I'm interested in and what I'm passionate about. And a lot of that goes into growth and development. Elliot, you mentioned parenting and those types of things that change those relationships. And I think that's had an impact too. But I get stuck on that kind of development that's happened over time that's again shifted, what I look at or what my hobbies are, what I enjoy doing. And so much of that is directed towards my career and where I found my home in a counseling setting. So I was just interested to hear others' perspectives. And that's kind of where the question came out of, was that particular golf experience. Triple bogey is a thing. I found that out real quick. In any case, our next question goes to Gina.
So this next question, we've talked a lot in here about traveling and about those various experiences. And so that's what this question was born out of. How has travel changed you or made you a better person? We'll start with Marty.
When I got this question, I started to figure out about travel because I was curious about it. And if you use a travel app and you used it consistently, it will tell you how many miles that you've traveled. And so, I use TripIt, and I started using it in 2009. Now, I started my academic career in 1997. In 2009, I had 285,000 miles clocked into TripIt. And that doesn't include, I entered academia in 97. So that totally missed most of my trips to Turkey. So add 20 at 10,000 miles round trip. And then about 20 trips to Nassau at 2,400 miles round trip, or 48,000 miles. One trip to Singapore at 18,000 miles. Conferences, KCREP. I'm over 500,000 miles of air travel at this point in my life. And I love it. I absolutely love it. I still can't get enough of it. I think when I made that transition and started doing traveling, the first time out of the country for me was in 2002. And as a result, that means I was like 40 years old was the first time I stepped outside of the country. And I realized at that point, everything for me that was going to be interesting, that I was going to be learning, was going to be involved not being in the country and connecting with people in other places. So travel has redefined my worldview, and you don't know how much it will redefine yours until you do it yourself. Jen?
When I was growing up, we traveled by car mostly. I had been on a plane when I was a young kid, but it wasn't very often, mainly because during the 80s, flying was not the most economical thing. And so flying was not something we did very regularly, but we would mostly travel within Florida, which is where I grew up. So my aunt and my cousins lived on the other coast, and I had cousins in Tallahassee, and then they were in Okeechobee, big metropolis there. But Florida's pretty much Florida. I mean, there's differences within Florida, but by and large, it feels pretty the same throughout Florida, even with those differences. And when we would travel, we'd mostly go to New York, because that's where both of my parents are from. That's where my mother's parents were. My father's parents were in Florida, but everybody's from New York. They live in New York mostly, and this type of thing. And when I was very young, I was probably about 4 years old, I remember noticing how the grass in New York smelled different than the grass in Florida, because they have like a sweet ryegrass up north, and we had sod. That's kind of if you have any grass at all in Florida, it's typically sod, because it's sand where I grew up. So, having grass is a different thing. And I remember one time we were traveling somewhere else in the car, and I was with my mom, and I remember saying, like, it smells like New York. And she said, well, what do you mean it smells like New York? I said, like, that sweet smell of the grass. And we were somewhere in Virginia or something. I mean, I don't know where the heck we were, and she said, oh, I know what you mean. And I equate that with what I've learned and what I continue to learn from travel, which is these continuous mindful moments that you have, where you notice something about how a place smells to you, or how it feels. Like, it's funny, like, you'll go to a place. I remember we had an ACES board meeting one time in Boise, which, by the way, huge fan of Boise. I think Marty was there, and Marty was definitely there. And I remember saying to folks, this feels like Denver. It feels like a small Denver. And it was funny. People didn't know what I was talking about, but there was just a feeling. And so I would say that the thing that travel has taught me the most is to pay attention to my senses and how I'm feeling, and to slow myself down, and to notice what is around me and what it's triggering in me, because that's what new places do. And eventually, and almost always, there ends up being some sort of gratitude, even for the places that I thought, like, I really hope we're not coming back here for a meeting or a conference or wherever it is that's dragging me off to. I won't disparage anyone's cities, but there have been some places we've gone that I thought, yeah, I don't need to come back here. Elliot?
Well, I think for me, it was more about giving me aspirations. And I've only traveled North America as a child and again as a teen, staying in Canada with my uncles. And, they were not pleasant people, but the places that we went, they were big hunter types of people. But, the places we went they're so different than Youngstown. And in 1987, my two closest friends and I, and we were all musicians, we bought Greyhound bus passes, which were good for the US and Canada. And we just spent like 6 weeks traveling. We would hike. And then when we got tired, we'd get on a Greyhound and go somewhere. But all three of us have ADHD. So you can imagine we're like, oh, well, let's go north. Let's go west. Fine. Okay, let's do it. But I was thinking, and when I said we got out to the West Coast, I said, I want to go back to some of these places in Canada that I remember from a kid. And so we went to Regina, Hope, British Columbia, Saskatoon, and just the small differences in culture and the people. And I was like, oh, that is the way I remember it. And so obviously my kind of goal at this point is to still migrate north, but I would like to experience travel outside of North America. But it's just, in my world, it's been kind of hard to do for time and for money, but I'm grateful for that exposure, because when I look at what America has kind of morphed into, I have this kind of base point from my Canadian experiences. I'm like, oh, not everyone's that crazy. Eric?
So for me, travel means something different. So I went to a dozen schools before I graduated high school. I was a military brat. I think I mentioned here, both of my parents have been remarried 3 times. So that involved some relocation. I've lived in 9 different states in the US. So when I graduated from high school and I started undergrad, I was pretty adamant about putting down roots somewhere, and had taken it to the nth degree, because it couldn't just be that, right? I also didn't want to work more than 20 minutes from my home. I didn't want to travel. I didn't want to be away from wherever my base of operations was. I bought my starter home at 19, and I stayed in it for 13 years, far too long. I just really needed that element of stability. And when I started really traveling, and, my wife grew up and lived in the same place her entire life and had been on a couple of road trips, but really never left the state of Pennsylvania more than 3 times. It took a bit of doing. And I think travel for me changed when I realized that I can experience these things and still go home. My stuff wasn't going to be in a box when I got home. I was going to be able to, it took me a while just to enjoy and appreciate and be out in a way that was meaningful. So I think now I've noticed this even more since this whole pandemic has started, that I'm missing it. I'm missing this change of venue. And it's such a switch for me, because I like I said, I didn't want to venture far from home for any particular reason. And now I'm like, well, there's all these places I want to see. And now I have to see it from my screen, at least for a little while, right? So it's kind of taken a road and a path for me. It's a little strange, a little odd, but I'm excited to get out and do more of it again. Gina?
I've traveled a lot. Growing up, my family and I traveled a lot. And then in high school, I did a bunch of living on the edge type of things. I applied for all sorts of travel abroad type programs. And I know that's a little unique for high schools, but I was able to travel to Africa. I was able to spend time in France. And then in college, I got to spend a lot of time traveling throughout the UK. And throughout all of those experiences, I think something that really stuck with me was not only like a sense of mindfulness and gratitude and the unbelievable feeling of being able to come back home, but throughout each and every one of those experiences, I think something that stuck with me was being adaptable. So, being a high school and college kid traveling, I oftentimes didn't have a whole lot of money or a whole lot of resources or knowledge or even the correct language in some of these places. And so, being adaptable was something that traveling really taught me, was from walking the streets to find a place to stay to figuring out how to get from point A to point B. Those were things that I had never encountered here at home. So having to on the road in a foreign country, not knowing the language, I think really taught me how to be adaptable and flexible and engaging and street smart and all those kinds of things. So I think that that's experience that I'm really thankful for. Additionally, this is kind of a side story, but every time I was in a different country too, we always ended up in the emergency room somehow. So getting a first line ticket to other countries' healthcare systems was always an adventure. And so I think that that always kind of stuck with me too, just that sense of adventure and that sense of thrill and just really living on the edge. So that's what traveling has meant to me, and that's how it's changed me as a person. And I think our next question goes to Marty.
Yeah, actually, this is not one of my questions, but it was submitted by a listener. So the question is, what's your next hobby? Jen?
I have no idea. I have been on this tenure track mill, so why I appreciated your answer earlier, Marty. I was in a doc program before that. I was working 3-4 jobs at a time before that, So I've been trying to get back to the hobbies I already had, of being able to exercise regularly and read regularly and sit and not look at a computer or answer a damn email. Honestly, like I know there'll be time for something new. And that time is coming very soon. But right now, I think I'm just trying to reestablish what it means to be a human being who is not chasing a really big thing that weighs on you 24/7 for 6 years at my institution. Elliot?
Well, for me, proper drumming. That's what I've just started. I'm so excited about it. When I was a solo performer, I would play guitar and sing, and I would use loop pedals, and I had a tambourine attached to a board under my left foot. I called it a stomperine. And then I had a device under my right foot that would give a bass drum kind of sound. And then I had 2 water jugs strapped on the mic stand. And my son and I called all of that the Musitron 3000. So I'd be playing and hitting things and stomping on things. And, I'll send you all a video from one of the performances. And I always had a sense of rhythm. But as a kid, if you wanted to be a drummer, your parents already had to be paying for private drum lessons, which my family could not afford. So I ended up on trombone, which I learned music, and that was fine. But I always had this rhythm in me. And so I've got an electronic drum kit, so I don't have to torture the rest of the family. But, I got the headphones, and I can sit there and I'll spend an hour on stick control, just basic exercises to get the, hands working right. And then I'll spend an hour doing whatever the heck I want to, which is extraordinarily fun, especially in these times. So that's mine. Eric.
Yeah, so this was a pretty easy one for me, actually. But I have to tell a little bit of a story to get there. So my wife and I have always played cards because we started out not having a whole lot. We got an apartment together, mostly Goodwill furniture and dumpster dive stuff, and she has this way of just making stuff work. So the place didn't look like that, but we knew what it was. And we found this card game, Phase 10. I don't know if anybody's ever played it, but we spent hours and hours and hours playing Phase 10, right? And Rummy and everything else. But we thought about having my groom's cake be a Phase 10 card, right? And we ordered it and it didn't come in time, so we didn't end up getting it, but that was the idea. So we found Skip-Bo, and we started playing Skip-Bo a couple weeks ago, and honestly have never played it. And now we're like finding odd times during the day or after the kids go to bed that we're going to sit down and play cards again. And it's an old hobby that's our next hobby now. And we do things like puzzling and stuff like that too. We have our own like nerdy get together kind of hobbies, but like it's something that's really special for us. That's our time. We sit and we have coffee and we play cards and we talk, and it's just something I really enjoy. And I'm excited because we found something new that feels the same, but it's different and it's exciting. So that one was a really easy one for me. And I believe the next answer goes to Gina.
Yeah, so I love these. I'm going to have to try out some of these games because we also love playing cards. Pre-baby, though. Similarly to Jen, I feel like when I saw this question, I was like, writing a dissertation, putting the child to bed, giving her a bath. These are my hobbies these days. But I think so I spent this weekend at a conference on neurofeedback, and that's what I'm writing my dissertation on. And I have to say, it was really hard and I'm exhausted, and there's a whole lot of difficulty in learning the language and the terminology and the software and the math and everything behind it. But I think that that's going to be my next hobby for the next year, at least while I'm writing this dissertation, is learning how to do neurofeedback and how to understand it. And we'll see where that takes me. Marty, back to you.
I have a closet full of shiny things. Every time something new comes my way, it's like, oh yeah, that's cool. I think I'll do that. And behind me, on the table behind me, you can't see it because my head's blocking the way. I have 3 months of Hunt a Killer boxes. Hunt a Killer, where they give you every month, they send you a different scenario and you have to figure out clues about where the killer is. And I thought, oh, well, maybe I'll get that. That's a nice distraction. I signed up for that, shortly after COVID started, and haven't touched one of the boxes yet, but I have them stacked up in order of the month, so I won't mess it up. But something I have in my closet that I would like to pick up is mandolin. I got a mandolin a while ago, and I played guitar before in the past, and I'm not sure I want to pick guitar back up and start that all over again just to get to where I was. Instead, I think I'd like to pick up mandolin. But I bought the damn thing, and the neck is so tiny on it, and I have these big, hulky fingers that I have yet to figure out how to successfully play a mandolin with these kind of finger pads that I have. But that would be my next hobby if I could pick up a next hobby. So we have time for one more, a final shot. And this goes out to each of you. The favorite city in the U.S. besides the one you live in. What's your favorite city in the U.S. besides the one you live in? Jen?
Denver, hands down, pre-legalization. Elliot?
Well, if it had to be in the U.S., I pick the unincorporated town of Beebe Plain in Darby, Vermont, because the border between Canada and the U.S. runs right down Main Street. They even call the street Canusa Street. So my goal is to go ostensibly for a vacation, and I'm going to dance my ass across Main Street and be in Stansted, Quebec, and take my chances with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police or whoever. I am seeking asylum. Eric.
Wow, I feel like I'm going to underplay my response now, Elliot. Because here I was going to say Flagstaff because it's pretty and there's mountains and it's also warm and you can ski and be in the sun, but there's no political strife associated. So I'm just going to say Flagstaff because it's pretty and it's warm. Gina?
So I think mine would be Park City, Utah. I love to ski. So similar reasons. It's pretty there, mountains, and there's snow. Marty?
Well, it's got to be Chicago, but Chicago's my hometown. So I kind of feel like, okay, pick your hometown because it feels familiar. But I love Chicago. It's nothing about that. But I've fallen back in love with New Orleans. There was a time when I first went there, it's like, oh, this is cool. And then after about 3 times there, it's like, but have gone back recently a couple of times and really enjoy the food and the music. There's a lot about New Orleans that I'm not excited about, but the food and the music right now for me, there's no other place to get both of those, in my opinion. So what did we learn tonight? No matter where Gina goes, she's adaptable. Elliot wants to do proper drumming. Eric feels bad for Dean Koontz, but loves Stephen King. And Jen knows the grass in New York smells different. Thanks to the squad, Eric, Jen, Elliot, and Gina. Look for these characters on their podcasts on the podtalk.net. You can find out more about them at circularfiringsquad.net. Our theme music is from Menage a Quad, Real Swing Shet. That's it for this episode of the Circular Firing Squad. Ready, fire, aim.
Thank you.